This act makes it compulsory for local governments to establish their own lifelong education promotion plans and to form regional committees for the implementation of such plans. In the European Regions report prepared by the 6th International UNESCO Conference on Adult Education, held in Belém, Brazil, in December 2009, it was mentioned that following the Memorandum on Lifelong Learning and the related action plan, awareness of the key role of adult learning and education has increased in the majority of European member states. Moreover, 17 out of EU 27 countries have adopted overarching lifelong learning strategy statements in response to the Lisbon strategy. Policies on adult learning and education exist in virtually every country in the European Union. Lifelong learning is seen now to be becoming a reality in Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. In Norway, both public authorities and the social partners have been preoccupied for a number of years with the risks of labor and skills shortages and mismatches. As a result, the Norwegian lifelong learning strategy was launched as the competence reform in 1998. One of the main results of this reform has been that all adults have been given a statutory right to primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary education. Considerable efforts have been made in recent years to improve educational opportunities for disadvantaged groups through adult education. This particularly applies to adults with especially weak schooling, various groups of physically disabled persons, adults with reading and writing difficulties, and adult immigrants. In Australia, lifelong learning as a term started to be used from 1995 and onwards. Since then, lifelong learning has been firmly placed on the school's agenda through the Adelaide Declaration on the National Goals for Schooling in the 21st century. This key document was endorsed in 1999 by education ministers to ensure high-quality schooling for all young Australians. The new Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians was updated in September 2008, acknowledging, among others, parental influence, early childhood development, and the central role of teachers in the learning process. It was committed to working with all school sectors, parents, communities, and businesses in order to meet diverse individual needs while supporting effective transitions from early childhood to the middle years and beyond. If we have a look on the national policies in developing countries, starting with China, we will see that the Chinese government has issued a series of laws, regulations, and policies of lifelong learning in recent years. The 1995 National Education Law stipulated that the state operate a lifelong education system and creates conditions enabling its citizens to learn throughout life. 3 years later, the Education Invigoration Action Plan for the 21st century noted that a lifelong learning system would be established throughout the country by 2010. Other initiatives have been adopted over the years, such as distance education, carried out in collaboration with the Central Broadcast and Television University. In 2004, the Ministry of Education published guidelines for the further promotion of community education. Wide-ranging activities have been carried out in many provinces to establish learning associations, learning cities, learning enterprises, learning communities, and learning families. By 2007, nearly 300 pilot community education groups had been set up in the provinces, and by this year is the 7th year that China is organizing national lifelong learning festivals. Thailand equally has introduced lifelong learning into its National Education Act. The same has recently happened in Namibia in the African region. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the regional synthesis report for the UNESCO World Conference on Adult Education 2009 indicated that most national and regional education initiatives and plans now refer to lifelong education in relation to the adult population. However, lifelong learning is often cited as a separate line of action or goal rather than as an overarching category. In the Ministry of Education in Jamaica, for example, lifelong learning has been added as a sixth section alongside early childhood, primary, secondary, tertiary, and special education. Jamaica, though, did establish a lifelong learning policy in 2005, but it is strongly oriented towards work and focuses on the high school's equivalence program. The vision is that a transformed Jamaica in which each person values and participates in lifelong learning to generate and sustain personal productivity in the pursuit of national growth and development. Since its creation, UNESCO has promoted the expansion of access to education as a universal right, a key driver of economic growth and development and personal fulfillment. The UNESCO Medium-Term Strategy 2008-13 has as one of its overarching objectives for the education sector attaining quality education for all and lifelong learning. The United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, which UNESCO coordinates, has similarly stressed the importance of lifelong learning as a key to the 21st century. The biennial sectoral priority number 1 for UNESCO's major program on education, presented at its 36th General Conference last week, was scaling up equity, inclusion, and quality in education and lifelong learning for sustainable development and a culture of peace and nonviolence. Quality education for all is thus an overarching UNESCO objective. UNESCO seeks to provide member states with technical support to develop and sustain the delivery of quality and development of responsive, integrative education and training services to all their citizens within a lifelong learning framework. It aims to promote a vision through multiple pathways to meet citizens' learning needs throughout life, to facilitate the acquisition of knowledge, skills, and competences relevant to their individual development and to the development in families, communities, countries, and also at their workplace. The UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning is an international resource center for lifelong learning with focus on literacy, adult education, and non-formal education as key components of lifelong learning. Lifelong learning has been a particular focus of the Institute since 1972. Over the past few decades, the Institute acquired a large store of knowledge and expertise on many different dimensions of the lifelong learning concept and its use as a guiding and organizing principle of educational reforms. Its mission is to see to that all forms of education and learning, formal, non-formal, and informal, are recognized, valued, and available for meeting the demands of individuals and communities throughout the world and fulfilling the right to education for all, and that the policies are implemented. In line with UNESCO's key functions, the Institute operates as a laboratory of ideas by identifying emerging challenges and current trends related to the building of learning societies through policy-driven and action-oriented research. The Institute conducts and collates research to make a case for and to monitor progress towards the achievement of literacy and basic education for all as the foundation of lifelong learning, and the promotion and improvement of youth and adult learning and education. As already mentioned, one of the Institute's major research initiatives centers on the recognition, validation, and accreditation of non-formal and informal learning in UNESCO member states, as this concept is crucial to making lifelong learning a reality and achieving education for all. Large-scale surveys and in-depth research on selected innovative cases are paving the ground for evidence-based advocacy and the dissemination of effective policies and practices. The international coordination of the World Conference on Adult Education, the Conferencia process, and the follow-up to the framework for action, the BILEM framework for action, includes research activities with a strong focus on data collection for national and international monitoring and capacity development to support member states in policy design and in improving adult learning provision. The Conferencia process, furthermore, serves to maintain momentum and to sensitize and mobilize policy and decision makers on adult education as a key component of lifelong learning. Following the request of the BILEM framework for action, the outcome document of the 6th International Conference on Adult Education, Conferencia 6, the Institute is now working with member states to develop UNESCO guidelines on recognition of all forms of learning with a focus on non-formal and informal learning. The overall aim of these guidelines is to propose principles, tools, and mechanisms supported by research-based evidence and analysis that can assist member states in developing or improving structures and mechanisms for recognizing all forms of learning, in particular outcomes from non-formal and informal learning, and thus developing national policy and international cooperation in this area. A series of capacity building workshops for developing capacity for establishing lifelong learning systems was launched last year at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, aiming at developing capacities in member states. The objectives are to promote sound conceptual understanding among policymakers and to advocate the integration of a lifelong learning perspective into educational policy, to develop a contingent of core change agents for policymaking and policy research, and to enhance international collaboration in capacity building. I will conclude with 3 messages for the future of lifelong learning. UNESCO has a lifelong learning agenda at its heart because it understands that only by educating and empowering people to become active and democratic citizens is it possible to create a world with mutual respect, with peace, dignity, and the security of families and communities. Consequently, it aims to support its member states to develop integrated and sustainable lifelong learning systems. UNESCO has not created a uniform model of lifelong learning and does not advance a uniform implementation strategy to be followed by all countries. There cannot be a common system of lifelong learning purely because the education and training needs and responses vary not only over time, but also within and between regions, countries, and different fields of study. Hence, cultural, linguistic, and national diversities have to be kept in mind and to be respected and reflected in tailor-made, learner-centered strategies. I'd like to conclude with the three following messages for the future. Lifelong learning is a framework to develop, upskill, and upgrade human resources at all levels for human and socio-economic development. This is the first message. The second message is making lifelong learning a reality also implies the creation of learning opportunities in all settings and modalities, formal, non-formal, and informal, for all individuals at all ages. And the third message is that lifelong learning is learning for employability, social inclusion, active citizenship, and personal fulfillment. But in the UNESCO perspective, this must be built on a foundation of humanistic values like education as a human right, peace, democracy, tolerance, respect for others, sustainability, and intercultural understanding. Moral issues must be built into all education and training systems in a lifelong learning perspective. Thank you for your attention.